Well, Jen McCreight blogs about atheism, feminism, science, and sex at Blaghag, which is www.blaghag.com. She's a board member of the Secular Student Alliance and a contributor to Atheist's Guide to Christmas. She was recently listed as one of the More magazine's top new feminists. Her day job is geeking. I haven't heard of that as a job before. About human genetics and evolution as a PhD candidate at the University of Washington. It's really great to have her here. Please welcome Jen McCreight.
Thanks for having me. So basically what I'm going to be talking about today is the number one question I always get when I go to atheist conferences, which is, why are so many women religious? It seems like a huge paradox to most people. But before I go into that, I just want to start with some definitions, because I'm going to be using the F word a lot, and I want to make sure we are on the same page. By the F word, I mean feminism. So the way I define feminism, and so do many feminists, is just as the theory of the political, economical, and social equality of the sexes. And a sort of unofficial definition I really like is that feminism is the radical notion that women are people. So that... Yeah, you like that one, huh? So that's all I'm talking about when I say feminism. And I want to make this clear because there are a lot of stereotypes about what feminism is. So what feminism is not, it's not man-hating. It's not a ploy to have women take over the world or blame men for everything. At least that's what I have to tell you guys. It's not humorless, which hopefully I will prove to you today. And it's not something only women can do. I'm a strong believer that men can be feminists too, because really, it's about gender equality. It's not about putting women above men. It's about getting rid of any stereotypes that apply to both sexes. And fighting sexism helps both women and men. So why should atheists be feminists? Why am I here talking about feminism at an atheist conference? Well, it's because sexism is irrational. If you can't read that, it says, feminism is outdated and sexism is no more. Women are just too stupid to see that. And I think sexism is very obviously an irrational thing, and if we're going to consider ourselves skeptics, we need to be fighting against sexism as well, in addition to things like homeopathy or religion. So the science behind sex differences is basically there aren't any. There's no difference in mathematical ability. Really what this is caused by is something called stereotype threat, where women who know the stereotype that women are bad at math do worse at math exams. But if they're told that women are just as good, or they've never heard that stereotype before, they do just as well as men. And one of the big things is, illustrated by this XKCD comic, is that if you see a man who's doing poorly at math, he just sucks at math. That's a personal thing. But when a woman sucks at math, it applies to the whole gender, that it's not just her personal failure at math, it's all women are bad. And women are also not better at reading emotions. That's a common misconception. Men are just as empathetic as women. And overall, when you look at all these sort of differences, like maybe verbal ability versus spatial ability, there's more variation within sexes than across them. And regardless, biology does not equal ethics. So even if we did find a biological difference between men and women, which, I'm a biologist, so I can say there probably are some, that it doesn't dictate how we should run our society, the rules we should have, what jobs women should have. And so I think we need to keep that in mind. So then, why aren't all atheists feminists? Well, I think one of the big things is we're not isolated from our environment. We grow up in a sexist society, and we grow up, a lot of us, in sexist religions. And it's hard to separate ourselves from those ideas. It's very hard and takes lots of years of being aware of these sort of problems to get over sexist ways of thinking. And a good analogy for this is, how many of you in the room used to be religious? Can you just raise your hand? So a good number. Just think how hard it was to give up God belief and give up tradition and religious sense and maybe the guilt that goes along with those traditions. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes a long time. And the same thing happens with sexism, in that when you're first challenged about sexist beliefs, you get very defensive. And it can take years and years of critical thinking to finally get rid of it. And so many atheists might have finally given up religion, but this is a whole nother step. Now, other things that not all atheists are skeptical. I wish that was true, because I consider myself both a skeptic and atheist. But there are plenty of atheists who come to their atheism for emotional reasons or personal reasons. And they may not like religion, but they don't necessarily apply skepticism to other parts of their life. So then, why should feminists be atheists? For the same reason anyone should be an atheist, because there's no good evidence for God. But I'm happy to start using some emotional reasons just to get more women thinking about why they should give up religion. Because, I can talk till I'm blue in the face about why there's no God, but often it's the emotional argument that will get someone thinking about it in the very beginning. And especially because in our society, there's this whole idea that you're not supposed to criticize religion, you're not supposed to disagree with someone about their religious beliefs. So I'm willing to point out some of the bad things religion is doing. So the main topic I'm going to be talking about is, why are women more religious? That's always the question I get. Whatever poll you look at, United States, Canada, it's always that women are more likely to be going to church, to be devout believers. And it seems like such a paradox. Why is this when there seem to be so many obvious examples of religion doing sexist, misogynist things? And I think it boils down to the fact that religion looks a lot like an abusive relationship. And if anyone here knows about abusive relationships, they're really hard to leave. It's the same thing where you're like, why are you sticking with someone who is harming you or threatening you or making you upset all the time? And there's a power aspect. It's hard to leave these because they have such the emotional connection, and they're basically being threatened to stay in this religion. And people giggle when I say this, and some people are like, religion's not like an abusive relationship, you're belittling it. But when you look at the examples, it's kind of eerie. So for Christianity in particular, do you feel afraid of your partner much of the time? It's the whole concept of hell. The whole idea behind it is fearing what God is going to do to you if you don't behave correctly. Do you believe that you deserve to be hurt or mistreated? Does your partner blame you for his own abusive behavior? It's the whole original sin concept. You deserve whatever treatment you're getting, you deserve to go to hell, and if you don't follow these rules, because Eve screwed up in the beginning, and now you have this original horrible thing in you that just makes you a bad person. So God is totally justified in doing what he does. Does your partner have a bad and unpredictable temper? Has anyone read the Old Testament? I mean, does anyone know where this is from? You remember, it's Kings, where God sends bears to kill 42 children because they made fun of the prophet for being bald. So, and this is just one of many examples of God needing some anger management. Does your partner hurt you or threaten to hurt or kill you? Satan is kind of the better partner in this situation. God has killed millions of people in the Bible, Satan only 10. So plenty of examples of God threatening to kill people and actually going through with it. And does your partner threaten to take your children away or harm them? Well, if you're a non-Christian child, God has no problem killing you in wars in the Bible. But he also will ask you to kill your own child if you're Christian, just so you know. And does your partner force you to have sex? God didn't really ask the Virgin Mary for permission. Just saying, that's... And we laugh, but this sort of idea is seriously perpetuated through a lot of religions too, that the man has dominion over his wife and that he should be able to have sex with her whenever she wants. So it's still perpetuated within Christianity. Does your partner act excessively jealous and possessive? Oh yeah, don't worship the wrong God in the Bible. It's the whole first commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me. He says it himself, that he is a jealous God. And does your partner control where you go or what you do? That's what religion is. That's basically all of organized religion, is saying, this is what you can do, this is what you can't, and not really giving a good explanation for why or why not you can't do those things. And when you look at a lot of organized religions, a lot of the stuff that they're saying is explicitly misogynistic. And a lot of these rules don't just apply to both men and women. There's so many more rules that apply to women and harm women. For example, if you look at Orthodox Judaism, they refuse to let women initiate a divorce. You have to sit separately in a synagogue and dress modestly and wear head coverings after marriage. And decisions about birth control and abortion are made by a rabbi, not a woman. So it's more important for the religion to have control over the woman's reproductive rights than the woman herself, or even the family. In Christianity, I found this quote by Rick Warren, which gave our president's invocation, so that's kind of worrying, that spousal abuse is not an acceptable reason for divorce. And this ties into the whole abuse concept of religion, that it's more important to stick by your vows because they were made in the name of God than to actually get out of any sort of abuse that's occurring to you. And is anyone here not familiar with the quiverful movement? Okay, so I'll read this quote. This is what the quiverful movement is based off of. Lo, children are the heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is his reward. As arrows are in the hand of a mighty man, so are the children of the youth. Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but they shall speak with the enemies in the gate. The whole concept behind the quiverful movement is outbreed your enemy. Have as many children as possible, so not only will you just outbreed them by pure number, but you'll have more people to go convert these people later, that you're basically breeding your own Christian army. And this is what the show 19 or 20 and Counting is based on with the Duggars. I don't remember what number they're on at this point. Where basically these women are literally breeding machines. They have no life outside of getting pregnant over and over and then taking care of these children. And it's very hard for these women to leave because even if they no longer believe in God or just no longer believe in the quiverful movement, they have 20 children left behind, and all of their daughters are doomed to the same fate as them. So it's hard for them to get out of this movement once they start. And Catholicism is sort of an easy target in this regard. Some of the more popular examples people know about. There's no ordination of women, and it actually results in an automatic excommunication because it's listed as a grave crime just as bad as child molestation to ordain a woman. Obviously, they're against birth control and against abortion even when it's done to save a woman's life. So they put the life of an unborn fetus above that of a woman. Not exactly a feminist concept. Now, if you're thinking, okay, Jen, these are all horrible things, but this is a result of culture. This is what organized religion does. It's not really based on scripture. There's plenty of stuff in the Bible about how women should act. For example, if a woman has a male son, she's unclean for a couple days. But if she gives birth to a daughter, she's unclean for weeks and weeks. It's dirty to give birth to a daughter. It's sinful. And obviously, a woman can't wear men's clothing, and that's an abomination. But again, a lot of people are always like, oh, well, that's the Old Testament. God was cranky back then, and then Jesus came and made everything better. But no, it's not just the Old Testament. There are plenty of things in the New Testament as well. Let your women keep silent in the churches, for it is not permitted unto them to speak. And if they will learn anything, let them ask their husbands at home, for it is shame to women to speak in the church. Submit yourselves unto your husbands. Adorn themselves in modest apparel. Silence in all subjected. Do not usurp authority over the man. And just in case it wasn't clear, this is all Eve's fault. So, women, you're the reason why we have suffering in hell anyway, so you deserve these extra rules. Now, I like to play a little game with the audience because some of these things can be kind of depressing. So I'm going to list some crimes, and I want people to shout out if they think they know what the biblical punishment is. All right, so if you wear showy jewelry and clothing, death, ugliness, misery, and death. I don't know if this is all at once or sequential order. I haven't figured that out yet. But death is part of it. All right. Having sex while on your period. Are you just going to say death for everything? Yeah. Banishment. Oh, yeah. It's a trick question. Adultery. Stoning. All right, someone got it right. Being a non-virgin. Stoning, except if you're a priest's daughter, then you burn her. That's another trick question. Touching a man's junk during a fight. Right, have your hand cut off. It's okay for another man to do it, but if a woman does it, don't defend your man. And if you rape a virgin, you have to marry her. And this is because when the Bible was written, women are property, and you just basically broke this person's property. You made her valueless. And that was the only role of women in society then, was to be sold off as a dowry. And if you rape her, it's kind of like a you broke it, you buy it policy in the Bible. That's the only worth of a woman, is to be married off. Now, aren't these just extremists? No. 14% of Canadians and 31% of Americans are biblical literalists. So you guys are doing better than us, but it's still scary when you think this is more than 1 in 10 people who are voting, and they think everything in the Bible is literally true. And I couldn't find the stats for Canadians, but 41% of Americans think Jesus will return by 2050. I'm sorry, as an American. But this is frightening. It's not just because, random statistics and people are believing silly things, but these people vote. This affects public policy, and their religious beliefs harm women when it gets into public policy. In America, abstinence-only education. It's been proven not to work, so many scientific studies, but people are still religiously motivated to remove it. And all of the recent funding cuts from Planned Parenthood. This is religiously motivated, but women are going to get sick and potentially die because of this. And I know in my home state of Indiana, they just passed laws that basically restricts all abortions after, I think it was 20 weeks, with no exceptions for rape or incest, or even health of the mother. And that's religiously motivated, that people are saying, we have to do this because the Bible says soul is injected at this sort of point. And we have separation of church and state, but people use their beliefs to get this into the law, and it hurts women. But it's not just the Bible. I harp on the Bible a lot because that's what I'm most used to, growing up in a very religious Christian state. But a lot of different religions have just the same problems going on. One of the big examples you hear about a lot is Islam. I think mostly for cultural reasons we like to harp on Islam, but they have many things that are also wrong in how they treat women. For example, women must dress modestly lest men lust after them. So, men can't control themselves, so women have to cover up. And this has serious consequences. Under some Sharia law, women can't even go out into public unless they have a man from their family or their husband escorting them. And this is why also that a lot of the burqa bans aren't necessarily a good idea, because now these women can't leave their house because you've banned the burqa. So it's a really touchy subject. And in 2007 in Saudi Arabia, there was an all-girls school that caught on fire. And when these girls are in the school, they're allowed to take their headdresses off. But they were actually kept inside the school by the morality police because they couldn't come out into public uncovered. And 15 girls died because of this. So women are dying because of these policies. It's not just about, I want to wear a low-cut shirt. People are hurt because of this. In the Quran, the price of adultery is 100 lashes and a year in exile for women, and it's much harder for a woman to get a divorce. A man just has to say, I divorce you 3 times, while a woman has to go through more normal means and actually file for it in their community. Women receive only half the inheritance a man would. Now, back in the day when this was first written, this was really progressive. They got anything at all, but nowadays, not so much. And a woman's testimony is only worth half that of a man. So in Saudi Arabia, for a man to be convicted of rape, he actually needs to either confess or have 4 male eyewitnesses to basically outweigh the claims, because a woman's claim alone doesn't mean anything, really. And a woman's husband has the moral duty to beat her for disobedience. And this one shocked me, but even when I said this at my last talk, there was an Islamic scholar in the audience. He's like, nope, that's right. It's right in there in the Quran. So it's sad that these sort of things are perpetuated. it's not just Abrahamic religions. Hinduism, this quote from the Vedas, I'll read for a second. By a girl, by a young woman, or even by an aged one, nothing must be done independently, even in her own house. In childhood, a female must be subject to her father, in youth to her husband, when her lord is dead to her sons. A woman must never be independent. And this sort of idea has a lot of implications when it's actually applied in culture. For example, women are always lower than men in the caste system. And you have these things called dowry deaths, where when a woman will marry a man, that their family has to give a certain dowry with the woman. And what happens is men and their families will harass women so much into giving more money that these women will actually go kill themselves to get away from the harassment. And this isn't something that just happens once or twice. In India last year, 8,000 dowry deaths were recorded. So those are the ones that are actually being told to the government. Who knows how much this is happening that isn't being recorded at all. You also have stuff like sex-selective abortion, where now the gender ratio is hugely skewed towards men in places like India because they don't want to have daughters. Women are actually saying that they're upset when they have a daughter. And even after these abortions, a lot of these female children are just left to starve and wither away because women are neglecting them. They don't want to have daughters. And in some areas of India, women are shunned as bad luck. And there's a tradition known as sati, where if your husband dies, you're supposed to throw yourself onto his funeral pyre because you're the reason why he died. But it's often someone throwing the woman onto the funeral pyre. And this was just made illegal officially in the 90s, and it still happens in rural areas. Even Buddhism, which seems, at least in the Western world, we see this as sort of like a nonviolent, nice religion. There's still sexist things there. Buddhist nuns, they're always considered more subordinate to Buddhist monks. So even the highest ranking nun is below the lowest ranking monk. And they have 111 more rules to follow than the Buddhist monks. Excuse me. Menstruation is viewed as unclean, so they're not allowed to come into contact with any of the holy books or temples when they're menstruating. And a specific sect of Buddhism actually claimed that women could never become Buddha because being a woman is a result of negative karma. So if you did something in a previous life, ladies, sorry, we all screwed up in our past lives apparently, and that's why we're being reborn as a woman. It's seen as a lesser thing. And even Jainism does this. How many people are fans of Sam Harris? Sam Harris, woo. He always says that if everyone was a Jain, I'd have no problem with religion. You know, I wish everyone was so nonviolent. Jains are the ones that, if you've ever seen a documentary, they sweep in front of them. They're really devout Jains because they don't even want to step on bugs because they're so nonviolent. But because of this idea of nonviolence, they see the female body as inherently violent because menstruation kills microorganisms. So I don't know if only like immunocompromised Jains could be enlightened. The biologist, this confuses me. But in addition to that, they see women as unable to break free of earthly attachments because they're meant to care for the children. And so because of this, it's the same idea that you have to be reborn as a male before you can actually be enlightened, because a woman is not able to be enlightened because of these traits. Now, religion doesn't necessarily create sexist ideas. A lot of people say, you know, we'll still have sexism even if you get rid of religion. But religion makes it untouchable. We have this idea in our society that we can't question religion, that we can't offend people by questioning their beliefs and saying that we're wrong or we just disagree. And when there's this bubble around religion, you also put a bubble around sexism, that people use religion to justify their sexist beliefs, and until we start being able to criticize religion, we can't criticize the sexist beliefs as well. And just one idea of this, I like this example because it's so benign, and it just illustrates that how crazy some religious people get when you dare question them. So this was a project called the Orchid Project that was at Dartmouth College, and the idea was to shift women's perspectives from the expectations and limitations of belief patterns, societal, cultural, or religious conditioning. And what they did was they handed out these little cards that had drawings of the female anatomy and a little pocket mirror to just anyone who's walking by and wanted to take them. and said, hey ladies, you should actually know what your body looks like. Seems like a pretty benign idea. But the religious people on the campus freaked out. Not just because they were letting people look at their vaginas, but because they included the word religious in their card. So one of the quotes from one of the letters to the editor was that respectful discussion will only breed further respect and discussion, but blatant attacks on an entire outlook of life will only breed further animosity, ignorance, and offense. So you can't even dare to say maybe you have been religiously conditioned and maybe it's wrong, because there's this bubble of respect that we just have to tolerate every idea you have. And because of this, you can't question sexism either, or can't tell women to learn about their anatomy. So why is this so hard for women to leave religion? I just gave all these examples where, it seems like it should be pretty obvious that religion isn't really helping out women in any particular way. And it goes back to the whole idea of religion being an abusive relationship. It's hard to leave because it boils down to power. A lot of women, all of their power in their life is tied to religion more so than men. And this is especially true when you look at really the patriarchal conservative religions, the ones that you would think the women should be most motivated to leave, is often the ones that are hardest to leave. Because when you think about it, everything in these women's lives are tied to religion. They don't work outside the home often enough, so all of their social networks are tied to people in the church. Any sort of power they do have is usually in something like teaching Sunday school, or being seen as the spiritual head of the household, or even doing something like a potluck. Everything they have control over in their life is tied into religion. So even if they start questioning it and not believing in it and wondering why they have all these extra rules to do, it's so hard to leave because, like an abusive relationship, it's set up in a way that it makes it so you can't leave. You depend on it, even if it's treating you poorly. And I think because of this, a lot of women also turn to other spirituality, maybe permanently and maybe often to a step onto atheism. Because a lot of these supernatural beliefs are based on the power of women, through their mother goddess or female sexuality as a source of power. And when you look at feminists, now feminists are more likely to be atheists, but the ones who are religious are more likely to have sort of new age spirituality rather than organized religion, which I think is a good sign why atheists should be partnering up with feminists, because they're obviously already doing a good job making women leave religion. But the sort of spiritual stuff they're into, like yoga and Reiki and Zen meditation and paganism and Wicca, it's all sort of things that there's no inherent misogyny towards women. There's actually a source of power for many of them. And the same idea is why so many women like the idea of women's intuition, that women have some sort of special power, that we just know certain things. And we like that idea because, men don't get that power. And it's the one thing we have that they don't. The problem is, this is all bullshit too. It makes just as little sense as Christianity or Islam or Hinduism. And so women turn to this as a source of power, but they're still ultimately powerless. And that's why I think it's so important that we get the atheist message out there and specifically try to talk to more women and make women-friendly events, because women are turning to these things because they think this is their only way to get power in their life, where I see it as the only power you're going to get is from yourself. And clinging to a supernatural belief is just going to leave you powerless. So what could we do? So there are two steps for leaving the first two steps of leaving an abusive relationship. And I think they also exactly apply to leaving religion. The first is to realize that there's a problem, which hopefully some of these examples will help people realize that, and realize that you are worthy of more than what your partner is giving you. So you don't need religion as a crutch, that you're worthy of more than it's giving you, that you can do well on your own. Excuse me. And I think the really outspoken atheists, the Richard Dawkins and P.Z. Myers of the world, who sometimes get a lot of flack for being firebrands, I think they do a good job at this, because they put the bullshit out in the open and say, look at what these horrible religions are doing to people. And I think that's why being outspoken is so helpful, because a lot of people don't even question religious belief until someone really points out what religion is doing. And the second step is to confide in a friend or support system. And that's why I think the flip side is also super important in our movement, that we have sort of the communities and social aspect that even online, we have blogs and forums people can go to for the people who are stuck in the middle of Montana or Alberta, I guess is your equivalent of Montana, that if you're in a town of 5,000 people and you're the only atheist, you can still at least go on the internet and know you're not alone. And this is getting so much better that back in the day, if you were in your little church and you thought that you were the only woman who was having these beliefs that maybe there was no God, it was a lot less likely that you're going to pursue them or think about them more because you think you're the only one. So what next? What can the atheist movement do to actually get more women leaving religion? I think there are a bunch of things we can do just to get our movement more inviting, accepting to women in general. And we are getting much better than we have in the last couple of years. So I already see progress, which is great. And one of the main things is just to provide a safe landing place. Like I said, if these women are coming from super religious communities where everything they have is tied in, it's hard to leave when you lose all of your friends and family. And so it's just important to have clubs that have social events and have people who can replace their friends. And one of the big things is to break the cycle and be aware that this cycle exists to begin with. Because I see this happening, and it's one of those things that if you don't escape it early, it just gets worse and worse. So if we have few visible women in the atheist movement, that leads to less women feeling welcome. There may not be a good reason to feel this way, but if you're a woman who knows nothing about the atheist movement and you hear a conference is coming to your town, and you look at the list of speakers and it's all men, you wonder, why? Like, maybe there's no reason why. Maybe it's just they couldn't get any women to fly in that day. But you're like, why aren't they letting the women speak? Or if you actually go to the conference and it's all dudes in the room, you wonder, what scared the previous women away? Is there something I haven't been initiated in yet? And so there might not be a problem, but it perpetuates itself. Because then once you've scared the women away, you have less women doing stuff, and then less women deserving visibility because they're just not as involved, they're not writing, they're not speaking. And that just leads to few visible women. So we really need to be proactive in getting women involved and not just say, oh, well, obviously we're not sexist, so they can come whenever they want. No, we need to be taking steps to make sure women want to come to these meetings. A big thing is to encourage women to take leadership positions. We don't want to be like the 2010 National Conference on Christian Apologetics, where this actually went on for another page, and there was just one woman all alone. And when you look at really huge conferences, it makes you wonder, why are they all men speaking? And we are getting much better at this. I know TAM this year is actually the first time where there are more women individual speakers than men. So yeah, good job, TAM. And it's harder to do at small conferences, just statistically. It's not significant if you only have a couple small women. Sorry, it's a scientist in me. But when you have 50 or some speakers, you really shouldn't only have 2 women like this conference. We also need to consider women's interests. That doesn't mean making everything pink and pretty with unicorns. Oh, this cracks me up. But you need to realize that for whatever reason, whether it's biological or cultural, that's a whole different debate, that women, on average, do tend to have some different interests than men. The atheist movement tends to be really focused on science and philosophy. And when you look at science and philosophy departments, they're already skewed towards men. So we're drawing from a pool that already has a male bias. But we need to make sure not to forget the humanities, because a lot of women come from those areas, and they'll find those things interesting as well. We also have to have more social events. This is the #1 complaint I hear from any woman when I ask, how can we improve atheist meetings? They don't want everything to just be this intellectual circle jerk and debate. They want to just go have dinner sometimes, talk about their pets, talk about hobbies, just be a human being and forget about atheism for 5 seconds. And we have to realize that there is a huge intersection of women's issues and atheism and skepticism. And the more we talk about these things and bring them to the forethought, the more women are going to show up to your conferences and talks. I know whenever I give talks to student groups, they always say that, wow, we had a lot more women come today. I'm like, well, it's because I'm talking to something that women find interesting. And just a personal example of this, so this is my baby. Does anyone here not know what boobquake is? Okay, cool, all right. By now, I figure. But yeah, so something like boobquake, where an Iranian cleric can say, immodestly dressed women are killing people through earthquakes, we can use our skepticism and say, no, that's not true, but let's test this hypothesis. You're making a scientific claim here. And this isn't just talking about making a scientific claim. It's also really important to women's issues. It's talking about, do women have the right to dress how they like, or are they going to kill thousands of people when they do dress differently? And the number one reaction I got from this was not from skeptics or atheists. Almost all the emails I got were from religious people who were thanking me for standing up to ridiculous claims and being skeptical and showing that when someone does make a ridiculous claim about women and tries to oppress them, that we should question it. And it was the first time a lot of these people have ever been introduced to skeptical thinking or the scientific method. And so if we see more things like this in the media, we should stand up and talk about it. Another important thing is to have designated moderators. Everyone benefits, but women especially are often talked over and interrupted. This is a really common theme across all groups, not just atheism. And I saw this all the time when I led my student group at Purdue, was that when I would speak, I was constantly interrupted, but if a male officer spoke, he was fine. And this benefits everyone, because then shy members in general get to speak up more, and they're not just talked over, but especially helps women. We also need to think about women's needs when picking venues. So I love skeptics in the pub. I'm a college student. I love pubs in general. It's kind of like a rule of the universe. But not all women feel comfortable there. For one, a lot of women have kids, and we're still in the sort of society where, yeah, men are taking care of children much more, but women do still get stuck with children. So they can't take their babies and toddlers to a bar. Or if we have a conference, we need to think about providing any sort of daycare services there at huge conferences like TAM. I know Seattle Atheist, they're starting to give daycare services at all of their general meetings, just so more families can come. And the other thing about pubs is that it sets up a dating environment, which can scare away a lot of women. It's hard when you're the only woman coming to a meeting, and then all the single guys sort of like rush onto you because it's like, oh, finally a girl, I need a girlfriend. I can sympathize, I'm single, I like to flirt, but when I'm coming to an atheist meeting and we're debating, like, can you be moral without God, that's not the time to start asking for my number. I'm there for intellectual discussion, and if you start treating women that way in those sort of environments, then it makes it seem like you don't actually care about what they say or think, you just care that they're there and they have boobs. So flirting is fine, but you need to do it at the appropriate time and place. So we need to just be aware of this, and if you see someone doing this during a really intellectual event, you sort of have to nip it in the bud and sort of maybe just shuffle that person away. But the big thing is really just to support women. It's really good to have someone on your side, because it gets old defending yourself constantly, especially on the internet. And this is what we've been doing really well with the GLBT movement, in that if you go to a comment thread on a blog post and someone says something really homophobic, hundreds of straight people will descend and just tear the argument apart. It's just amazing how quickly those things get decimated. But when someone leaves a sexist comment, it's more likely that you find hundreds of people coming in and agreeing with them than tearing it apart. And the thing is, one guy can ruin it for everyone otherwise. So I was at a meeting, and this was one of the first meetings I went to with this particular group. And I sat down, we're having a discussion, again, intellectual discussion, and the guy across from me pulls out his cell phone and starts holding it in front of me like, he's trying to take my picture or something. And I kind of move away. I'm like, what are you doing? And I'm obviously uncomfortable. And he's like, oh, I'm looking at your boobquake photo and comparing it. Look how hot you are. And I'm looking, I'm like, that's not appropriate. And the guy next to him said, well, it's not sexual harassment because we're not in a workplace. And all the guys around him at this atheist meeting were silent. And afterwards, I actually got an email from a couple of the guys, and they were like, I'm so sorry you had to deal with this. But what if I'm not this outspoken blogger, speaker type person, and I'm just, random woman coming to her first atheist meeting? If no one stands up for me, I couldn't even stand up for myself, and I'm usually very outspoken. I was just so shocked by the situation that you are implicitly saying that you agree with this person if you don't disagree then. And normally, most women just wouldn't come back. Why would you want to deal with that? So when you see people doing this either in person or on the internet, you need to speak up because it shows that we have an ally. It shows that we're not crazy. It's not just a crazy harpy woman with their one opinion. It's that this is a real issue when it comes to sexism. But the big thing is just to listen to women and try not to get defensive. So if you can't read this, it says, look, kitten, I don't give a damn what you think. If I say I'm a feminist, then by God, I am one. I can understand why people want to get defensive. I've done it myself, because no one likes being called sexist. No one likes being called racist. We all see ourselves as good people, and when we screw up, we don't like admitting it. And so it's a very natural response to get very defensive in these sort of situations. But we just have to remember that no one's perfect. I mean, I consider myself a very strong feminist, and even I screw up sometimes and get emails about how what I said was horrible, and I have to, usually my reaction is to get very defensive, but I have to sit and think about it and see if I really did make a mistake. How not to respond? Don't deny it. Don't start listing how many female friends you have. That does not help your argument at all. Try your best not to respond with snark, sarcasm, or mockery. I'm usually very pro snark, sarcasm, and mockery, but in a situation where, for example, you're a leader of an atheist group and someone's coming forward with a concern about how women are being treated, that's not the time to blow them off. Because oftentimes women won't speak up at all because it's very awkward, and it takes a lot of nerve to bring that thing to the forefront when it's an unpopular opinion. And try to avoid triggering words. So these are words that have been historically used to silence women, stuff like hysterical, overreacting, overemotional, humorless, that historically, if a woman was making an argument, you would just use one of these words like, oh, you're overreacting, you're just an emotional woman, and not really care about what she's saying. So even if it does seem like she's not having the best sense of humor, if a woman is used to getting these sort of responses from guys, you're going to shut down discussion because she thinks you're not actually listening to her if you're just saying these things. But what if they're wrong? Women are wrong sometimes. And you're allowed to disagree with them. We're not always right. Just do it professionally. If you unintentionally offend someone, especially if you're a leader of an organization, just apologize. It might be hard to do when you think you're really right, but it at least shows that you're in good faith and you're trying to have a conversation. Discuss, don't debate. And if people are too upset and just want to scream at each other, you should just continue the discussion at another time when people have had the opportunity to cool down, because screaming at each other really does not get anything done in this situation. But the big thing is to listen to women, and that's plural. Not all women are the same. We're not this monolithic entity. We don't get a set of rules when we're born and things we have to do and the ways we have to act. And I'm just one woman, and you have to keep in mind that the women who are already coming to conferences and meetings aren't necessarily the same as the ones who aren't coming, that there are certain reasons why women don't come to these conferences, and if we want them to come, we can't just be asking women who are already coming. And so it's really important to go up to your friend who doesn't come and be like, hey, so what would make you more likely to come to our events? And just being open and listening and not giving your own opinion for at least 5 minutes. It's hard to do for a lot of skeptics. I think we're a very opinionated bunch when it comes to these things. But just, taking a step back. And this isn't just for the sake of diversity. We seem to have this image in the movement that we're all old, white, apparently scary men coming out of the darkness. I love this photo. But women have just as much to contribute if we let them. And it's a shame that so many women who are just as great speakers and writers as the Four Horsemen, that a lot of people don't know who they are. Who in this room knows who every woman on this list is? A couple hands, and that's great. Usually I say that and I get maybe one hand or none. And all these women are just as deserving of our attention and just as deserving to have us read their articles and invite them to conferences. And so many people just aren't aware that they exist. And this is part of the breaking the cycle, that I'm putting these people out there because you should go look them up. They're all fabulous. And once we start being aware of the great work these people are doing, then we can help break this cycle and get more and more women involved. And I do have a list on my blog. I need to fix this link, it's too long. But if you go to the main page of my blog, there's an awesome list of female atheists. And it's way larger than what I have on the screen. They're bloggers, they're writers, they're comedians, and they're all fabulous. And we just need to start getting the word out that these women exist so we get more women into the movement. And that way it'll be easier for us to send the message to religious women that we can do it without God, that we are an open movement and you don't need religion to be a strong, independent woman. And with that, I will take any questions, and thank you for having me speak.